November is National Children's Grief Awareness Month, and I wanted to address the specific needs of children during the time they're grieving, during the grieving process. And this came top of mind because I interviewed a lady, Jenny Lisk, a couple of weeks ago. She lost her husband and the father of her children to brain cancer. And she had to figure out a way to help her kids navigate that grief, the loss of their dad. And it brought home to me, the story resonated with me because I was raised by my granddad from the time I was 9 months old. And about the time I was about 10 years old, my granddad had esophageal cancer. He was a heavy smoker, a tobacco smoker, and so he got cancer. And he was in the hospital for about 2 years. And when the doctors couldn't do anything more for him, they sent him home. And home at the time I was living with my aunt at the time, and that's where we stayed. And I slept in the same bed with him. He was sick, and somebody needed to be there with him. And so one particular night, he indicated by rocking the bed and tapping the bed and tugging at me, saying he wanted his radio. He had a radio and he always listened to it, and for some particular reason he wanted it this night. And so I got his radio, turned it on for him, and the next morning I woke up, I realized he had wet the bed, and I called to my aunt and told her, he's wet the bed. And she started to change him. I put my arms underneath my granddad and held him up. By then he was thin and frail. My granddad wasn't a big person. He's very tall, he was very tall, but not very big. And the cancer just took its toll on him, and he was barely anything by this time. And so I held his back to my chest, arms under his arms, and held him while my aunt changed his pajama bottoms. And then I noticed his arms just fell. And I said to my aunt, "Auntie, I think he's dead." And she goes, "What are you talking about? Are you stupid?" And I'm like, "No, Auntie, he's dead," because his arms had gone limp in my hands. And so it turned out that I was right. My granddad had left, and I was left alone without the parent, the only parent I knew. Now, I did my, the normal thing, cried, but there wasn't anyone there to grieve with me. My aunt grieved because that was her dad, and other people grieved because, he was family. But there wasn't anyone to grieve with me as a child. I was barely 12 years old at the time. And I carried that grief with me for decades. I remember one day I was traveling on a bus from in Ontario, going to work in Toronto, and I was talking to a guy that was sitting next to me. We were talking about our lives, and I focused on the loss of my grandfather. All I could talk about was my grandfather. And that time, it was like 15 years later, I broke down on that bus because the loss was so great and I hadn't dealt with it. I didn't know how to deal with that loss. And there wasn't another parent. There wasn't another parent to fill his death, right? A couple of years later, I was shipped off to England, and England didn't work out, so I left and went to Canada, but still grieving. And while I was in Canada, all that time I was still dreaming. I was dreaming about my granddad. I was always dreaming threes, dream consecutive nights, just have my head full of this man. And I had 3 dreams where in real life I was pregnant. I was pregnant with my first son. And in dreams, I would dream that I had the baby and I took the baby and gave it to my grandfather. I just took the baby, gave it to my grandfather. 3 times I dreamt that dream. And a week later, I lost the baby. And it was hard. It was very hard for me to deal with that loss. Even 15, 20 years later, I was still hurt. I was still hurting. And at one point, it got so bad, I was angry. I got into, after all this time, I was angry. Because what happened, I would make all these bad choices. And when the relationships didn't work, I would blame my granddad, because I would say, if he was here, then this wouldn't have happened. I mean, and no rationality to it, that thinking, but that's how my brain was processing that loss. And so I'm encouraging you, if your child or children lost a parent or any loved one, teacher, friend, because you really don't know, you never know what connection that child has with that person. And so help him or her grieve. It's more than just, mom's gone, dad's gone, and they cry and you hush them. Some kids are going to need more than that. They're going to need help to understand why they were abandoned by someone they love, because it's a loss, and it's a great loss. So the next video, I'll show my interview with Jenny Lisk, and how she talked about how she helped her children through that grieving process. And she started a podcast to help other people who are grieving or, want help in how to handle grief. And so remember that the death is a loss to us. That's how human beings process death. But for those of us who are alive, we need to process it properly so it doesn't affect our lives long term. And we can have positive memory. We can embrace the positive memories of those who have gone on before us. And so this I just wanted to talk about that, because it affected me so in such a profound way, and so for such a long time, that like I said, even now I'm having the after effect of those bad decisions made because I didn't deal with that grief. And so I'm asking you, mom, dad, whomever you are listening, caregiver, that you remember those children when they're grieving. And remember that there are 1.5 million single parent household that are single parent household because the child lost a parent. One other important statistics is that 1 out of 5 children will lose a parent before they're age 18. And so these children need our help to support and guide them through that process. Not to tell them not to cry or not to grieve, but to help them process what is happening. And because we all absorb loss in different ways. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and let me know in your comments below. Have you had to deal with a child who have lost a parent or a loved one? Please subscribe and show your support for these amazing women who are raising children alone.